morning, everyone. Lakeisha Williams here at MOHS, passing it over to Aliza.
Hi, everyone. Aliza Solins, Resource Allocation Committee Chair of the Baltimore City Continuum of Care, and special thanks to Erin O'Keefe for serving in your supportive leadership role for the RAC.
Okay, I'll jump in
Wonderful.
and say hi.
Thank
I'm
you
not
all.
on camera. Erin O'Keefe, also with the Resource Allocation Committee, and I'll pass it back to MOHS.
Perfect, thank you. And I'll be going through our Bidders Conference slides, but just remember and keep in mind that the Resource Allocation Committee and the Continuum of Care really leads this work, and I'm so appreciative of everybody's time to get here today. So with that, I will share my screen and begin the presentation. All right, as I shared, my name is Althea Linus Fernandez. I'm the Chief of Policy and Partnerships at the Mayor's Office of Homeless Services. And we are here today to talk about the Continuum of Care Notice of Funding Opportunity, which is an active funding opportunity. It is out and it has a deadline of July 15th at 5 p.m. sharp. This webinar is being recorded. We will be posting the recording on YouTube, as well as the slides. Some of the slides are already up, but we'll reissue them as well with some slide adjustments that we've made. The website is also where you can find the other materials that we will be referencing as part of this presentation. We will be muting attendees, and feel free to put your questions into the chat as we go. But we will be answering them at the end of this presentation as well. And then we will be focusing on general questions. For specific questions, you can still feel free to put them in the chat. Just know that we will have either we'll have to address them via email or set up another time to talk about this. And we've also put our generic email inbox here that we'll put in the chat as well, where you can ask us questions at any time about this funding competition. As we go, we will provide updates through the COC email listserv. You can also, again, see everything on our website. Our goal today is to give a brief background about what this funding opportunity provides, some of the key changes that have come in for this year compared to prior fiscal years, and give you a foundational understanding of what needs to be done to submit a successful application, and then how we get from the application process to making awards. Okay, so what is the Continuum of Care Program Competition? The program competition follows a Notice of Funding Opportunity, or a NOFO, that is issued from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Last fiscal year, FY24, I guess 2 fiscal years ago, our city COC received over $31 million in funding for homeless services. Share a little bit more about the types of projects that this funding opportunity covers. As part of this local competition, our Continuum of Care, and again, that Resource Allocation Committee that I referenced earlier, reviews, ranks, scores, selects not only new projects, but also returning or renewal projects. Additionally, the role of the Mayor's Office of Homeless Services within the COC and within this competition in particular is the collaborative applicant. So it's our responsibility within MOHS to work under the direction of the Continuum of Care to gather and submit the final application to the Department of Housing and Urban Development for our city's Continuum of Care as a whole. As I mentioned, the COC board provides oversight of this process generally, and particularly to the Resource Allocation Committee, which Aliza and Erin are chair and co-chair. And the Resource Allocation Committee creates and sends to the COC board a scoring and ranking criteria, which is then reviewed. And that determines, and we'll cover it a little bit later, but that determines the criteria that is being used to measure all of the applications that are coming in through this local competition. They develop the annual reallocation strategy, and they oversee the work of the Mayor's Office of Homeless Services in the capacity as the collaborative applicant. After this competition is complete, the three components that we as a COC submit to the Department of Housing and Urban Development is first, a application. So this is not the applications that organizations submit to us, but rather an application for our COC and our city as a whole. It's mostly narrative. Second, a project ranking. So taking the third component, which is all the separate project applications that are selected for this, we also submit to HUD a ranking of the projects that we want to fund in order of highest to lowest score. And this is our final package for HUD. What we'll be talking about today is really number 3, so those project applications that are submitted to as part of this local competition. Usually, and for this opportunity, it matches the average. There's typically an 84-day timeline starting from when HUD releases the notice of funding to when the COC as a whole submits that final package of those 3 components I mentioned earlier to HUD. Today we are at the Bidders Conference, so in the 4th square. What has already happened is the Resource Allocation Committee has approved the scoring criteria. The local RFP has been released, which is what we're talking about today. Following this Bidders Conference, we'll not only post the materials, but we'll also post an FAQ. And as we receive more questions, we might issue a part 2 of the FAQ as well. The local application deadline is July 15th. That's a Friday at 5 p.m. And between July 15th and our final submission date to HUD, which is August 24th, the process of led by the Resource Allocation Committee of reviewing, scoring, ranking, posting those rankings, and making those decisions public and making our application public are what goes on between that July 15th and August 24th, those 2 milestones. Your go-to resource for this funding opportunity is our website. There you can find the RFP, which outlines all the requirements, the guidance. It has some sample MOU and match verification documents, but it also includes those local scoring criteria and threshold criteria. On our website, you can also find the application templates and the link to our application portal, which is in Neighborly. Another really important resource that I encourage everybody to look at is the actual notice of funding published by HUD. It is a large document. It's usually over 150 pages, but that is the kind of ultimate guide for us on what we need to do for this local competition. There's a lot of leeway for communities to make some additional decisions as well, but this is ultimately the key guidance document that we have for the COC funding opportunity. So I especially encourage people to take a look at the merit review section, the scoring criteria section for an understanding of how HUD will be looking not only at individual applications, but our community as a whole. And that is available on the HUD website. And I think it's also linked in our RFP. Next, we're going to discuss funding availability and different project types. Right now, the funding that we estimate to be available has not been confirmed by HUD yet. We understand the general methodology that they use to calculate ARD, or annual renewal demand, and we understand what they've done in the past for bonus funds. So what you see on the screen here is our projection of what we'll have available for bonus funding and also for our annual renewal demand. But I do want to make sure everyone is aware that this is a projection because HUD has not yet confirmed it. So when it is confirmed, we will, if updates are needed, we'll include that in the FAQ. We'll make sure folks are aware. But this is our a strong estimate right now. We project that there will be 31.6 million for annual renewal demand. So this is the base amount that our COC is eligible to apply for. This does include youth homelessness demonstration program funds. In addition to our annual renewal demand, there are 2 pots of bonus funding. So this is funds that we are not currently receiving. And first is COC bonus funding. And we project this to be about 6.3 million. And then there's a set of bonus funds specifically for projects that are related to domestic violence. And we project that to be about 3.1 million. Finally, we have the COC planning grant, which is used to support staffing and funding for the collaborative applicant to operate and execute COC and HUD required activities. So as a whole, we expect there to be about 42.6 million of total funding available under this funding opportunity. Now we're going to get into the projects that are can be funded through this NOFO, or that the COC funds generally support. So first is the general category of permanent housing. And HUD has designated that there are 3 specific project types that they see as permanent housing. First is permanent supportive housing. So this is housing assistance and supportive services to assist households where at least one member, an adult or child, has a disability, and it supports them in achieving housing stability. Second is rapid rehousing programs. This is also permanent housing, but they provide up to short-term or medium-term, so 3 to 24 months of tenant-based rental assistance and supportive services to households experiencing homelessness. And the third is a joint transitional housing rapid rehousing program that provides a safe place for people to stay in transitional housing with financial assistance and wraparound supportive services. This also has a time limit of 24 months. Moving away from permanent housing, transitional housing is another project type. It provides temporary housing and supportive services to individuals and families experiencing homelessness, with the goal of interim stability and support to successfully move to and maintain permanent housing. Transitional housing projects can cover housing costs and accompanying supportive services for program participants for up to 24 months. The next category, supportive services only. And within supportive services only, HUD has designated 3 different subtypes as well. So there's first a street outreach part of the supportive services only project type, which is dedicated to street outreach activities to individuals and families that are primarily residing in places not meant for human habitation. Second is coordinated entry projects to develop or operate coordinated entry systems. And third is standalone supportive services only, which is essentially a catch-all for all the other types of supportive services, funds, and projects that can be supported through this funding. So it can include case management, education services, employment assistance, legal services, and utility deposits. The list is longer. You can see it in the RFP as well as HUD website. So those are our project types. We're now going to highlight some key changes from compared to last year. And for those of you that were with us last fiscal year and last competition, we're primarily comparing this to FY24, the FY24-25 NOFO. In every NOFO, HUD starts out by listing some of their priorities, and you can see those priorities implemented in the rest of the NOFO structure. And so I won't go too much into detail about exactly what has changed, but you can see here on the slides that compared to the FY24-25, priorities that were listed out, there's been significant changes in what the goals and objectives are for this funding opportunity compared to previous funding years. I'm going to go through these. This is reiterating language that HUD has put into their NOFO. So most of this is a little shortened, but using their language. And if you want to read more detail, you can go to the NOFO that they have published. First, their first priority is improving outcomes. Second is creating competition to improve innovation and accountability. You can see that by some of their changes to the Tier 1 and Tier 2 competition, which I'll talk about shortly. Third is restoring balance to the continuum of care. And in particular, their goal is to shift focus away from awarding the current status quo of nearly 90% of funding to permanent housing, and instead expand opportunities for transitional housing and supportive services only programs. The fourth goal is prioritizing treatment and recovery as a means to self-sufficiency. So encouraging investment in treatment-focused beds, recovery housing, and partnership with community behavioral health providers. Fifth, promoting economic self-sufficiency. So the goal of independent living as supported by the various supportive services that these programs can offer. 6, advancing public safety for all, especially those living on streets and in encampments. 7, minimizing trauma for vulnerable populations. And 8, expanding access based on merit, not ideology, which goes a little bit back to some of the competition items in the first priority. In terms of how the competition is structured, this is key slide here. So some of the changes that have been made. First of all, Tier 1 projects are capped at 60% of ARD or 18.9 million. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in a later slide, but what that essentially means is that in previous fiscal years, Tier 1 was 90%, and those were often just considered relatively safe, didn't have to compete as rigorously nationally. And so previously that was 90% of our entire funding portfolio was Tier 1. But now it has been capped at 60% of ARD. So that also leaves 40% in Tier 2 that will be subject to more rigorous national competition. So again, this goes back to the HUD priority of increasing competition. The second is a local decision to cap permanent housing at 55% of permanent supportive housing at 50% of ARD or 17.4 million. The reason that this decision was made is because HUD has created, as part of their total amount that they have available for the COC NOFO, they have created a set aside that will prioritize transitional housing and supportive services only programs. So some of you might have been more familiar with, or some of you might be familiar with some of the funding competition that had previously that had a permanent housing cap. This is not exactly the same thing, but effectively it does limit the amount of housing funding that is available for permanent housing as a whole. So in response to that, we have made a local decision to cap permanent supportive housing funds to 55% of our ARD. So again, 17.4 million. Within that, PSH is the priority to sustain housing for our most vulnerable clients being served. So as a result of that, we will not be accepting renewals for rapid rehousing and joint transitional housing rapid rehousing. Beyond that, there is an emphasis on transitional housing and supportive services only projects, in keeping with the set aside that HUD has issued. And lastly, all projects except for COC planning have to compete. So this includes any YHDP projects and any domestic violence projects. In previous fiscal years in FY24, that was not the case. They were set aside from the competition, but this year, all projects except for planning have to compete. HUD has also added some additional criteria for project review. So first is around threshold criteria. The project application applicants will be required to certify that they will not engage in illegal racial discrimination or operate safe consumption sites. Second, there are new threshold criteria by project type. So this has been added to the application narrative, or it's incorporated within the application narrative. But new projects that HUD reviews will have to, the HUD will be reviewing to make sure that they meet those threshold criteria. For example, for new transitional housing, these projects must offer 20 hours of services and required participation in supportive services. And second, new street outreach must demonstrate law enforcement partnerships. So those are just two examples of some of the threshold criteria that have been added in by HUD. And as a result, you'll see questions related to those in our local application process. Finally, HUD can deny applicants for evidence of a history of subsidizing or facilitating activities that conflict with the purposes of this NOFO, including reevaluating a project that previously had eligibility if there's evidence that they have conducted activities related to, you know, in their words, racial preference, or use a definition of sex other than as binary. There are also new rating criteria for the COC application as a whole. And again, once we get all the local applications that are in, our community as a whole, led by the Resource Allocation Committee, submits our own narrative, our own, our own questions we have to answer as a whole to HUD. And some of the new items that they're scoring us on is first, availability of treatment and recovery services, participation in requirement in services, a local demonstration of reduction in encampments, and leveraging healthcare and housing resources. These are not the only changes, but they are some of the ones that trickle down into the local application process as well. So just wanted to flag these, but there are certainly more. All right, now how to apply. First, a note on permanent housing. So I mentioned this earlier, but in terms of what projects are being, or what applications are being accepted for permanent housing, providers can submit renewals for permanent housing. However, be aware that awards will be significantly reduced compared to prior years due to that 60% cap on tier 1 and that set aside that HUD has created to prioritize other forms of other project types. Therefore, if you are, or if your organization operates a permanent housing program, you should also consider submitting an additional new project application for either transitional housing or supportive services only project types as well. So again, to say it explicitly, rapid rehousing and that joint transitional rapid rehousing project type are ineligible for renewal applications because we are only prioritizing PSH. Additionally, new applications for PSH rapid rehousing and joint transitional rapid rehousing are not being considered for new applications for bonus and DV funds. Transitional housing and supportive services only are open to new and renewal applications. And again, new applications, especially for transitional housing, are strongly encouraged. And just keep in mind that within that supportive services category, there's 3 different project subtypes as well. As mentioned previously, there are two funding, two pots of funding for bonus funds that we can apply for. And for both of these pots of funding, we are accepting projects for the transitional housing and supportive services only project types only. YHDP renewal and replacement applications. There's a couple changes. So one, again, now YHDP projects must all compete. If a YHDP renewal is being submitted, it must still maintain fidelity to youth-centered program models and demonstrate continued coordination with the Youth Action Board. If it's a YHDP replacement, which is essentially a new YHDP application, it must be approved by a youth action board before submission. It needs to meet the new requirements and activity restrictions, and is subject to the other threshold and threshold requirements, and will be assessed against HUD priorities as well. So transition grants. So this is a specific type of application. It's not a project type. So this is not the same thing as transitional housing. We're talking about a specific type of grant application. So transition grants are a type of new application, and it's only available to currently funded projects that are expiring in the calendar year of 2027. And it's available for those currently funded projects that want to change their project type. So I think the most common example of this might be changing rapid rehousing or a permanent supportive housing program to a transitional housing program, but it could be within any project type. The transition grant, if awarded, will have a start date that is the day after the end of the previous grant. You can consolidate multiple renewing grants into one transition grant. But reminder that it is a new project application. So even though it's transitioning a project that's currently renewal, it is considered a new project. So it needs to be filled out using the new application project template. And it's also scored using the new project scoring tool, and also is reviewed by HUD for those threshold criteria that they have for new projects. YHDP projects cannot be, are ineligible for transition grants. Those can only be done via a replacement. So again, current permanent housing providers should consider the following. You should consider submitting a renewal application. A reminder that there is significant more competition this year, and a majority may not be funded, since the priority will be given to permanent supportive housing and at 55% of ARD. Also consider submitting a transition grant to shift the project type, which is considered a new application, but does have that benefit of continuity with the last grant end date. Also consider new project types or scopes, or COC bonus funding submissions. Encourage everybody to go into the RFP and look at the scoring criteria. First, for the renewal scoring, especially to have to get a sense of what it is that renewals will be scored against, and maybe to get a sense of where your project could potentially rank or how you might perform generally. A lot of the data is from HMIS, as well as data from our fiscal teams and our compliance teams. There are some criteria based on HUD requirements or priorities that have been added to those renewal scoring tools. Second, new project scoring. please take a close look at this. There are also point values and information on the application itself, but this summarizes the overall categories and the different sections outline correspond with the actual application, but can tell you where most of the points will be coming from or what components are most important. This also includes the HUD threshold criteria that HUD is requiring all new projects to comply with. These are incorporated into the new project scoring tool. Okay, so starting an application. There have been, for those of you that have applied to COC program funds in the past, there have been some changes to the application template. So I want to start off by saying that many of the questions will be familiar, but there have been some changes. So first of all, if you are submitting a new application, and this includes a application to transition grants, any of the bonus fundings, but also critically for YHDP replacement projects, you will be filling out 2 documents. One is a Word document with a narrative, and second is an Excel document for that match and budget. Previously, this was all one Word document. Now it's 2 pieces. If you are if you're submitting a renewal application, then there's still just one document. It's still an Excel sheet. There are some brief narrative questions, but it's primarily budget and match. And this is what you will submit if not only if you're a renewing program, but if you are a YHDP renewal, this is the submission that you will upload. And a reminder that if you are a renewing applicant, your application needs to match the grant inventory worksheet in terms of unit and budget that is uploaded to our website. There's additional documents that need to be submitted as well. I won't go through all of them here, but I'll note that I guess this is somewhat new. We've done it for a little while now, but certificates of good standing and charitable status registration are 2 important pieces. As I mentioned before, everything is submitted via Neighborly, and the application portal closes at 5 p.m. sharp. So please, 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 please submit before the application portal closes, because late applications will not be accepted. And there is nothing we can do about it. So get started now. You can add in multiple people. If you have any issues, you can email us or our Neighborly colleagues as well. And I think they have their application there. If you do have technical issues, especially as we get closer to the application deadline, please make us aware you're having technical issues. That's really helpful for us to understand too. We might not be able to fix it ourselves, but it's really important for us to know. Match is required for the Continuum of Care programs. This is a 25% match of the award amount, excluding leasing funds. It can be cash or in kind. If it's in kind, there must be an MOU. They must be for eligible activities under the COC program from private or public sources and documented on a monthly basis. HUD has also emphasized leverage and match that comes from healthcare or housing resources that are not the COC or ESG. So please use the templates in the application package. Program income, if your program receives income, it can be counted as match, but it needs to be indicated as such on the application. In-kind contributions can include value of real property, equipment, goods, or services. And if it's provided by a third party, it must be documented with an MOU. In the RFP, you'll also see these different budget categories for each of the project types. So what you can request line items under, for each of the project types. So encourage you to take a look at this. And HUD has a very similar grid on their website as well that I find helpful. In your budget document, we request a list of staff. Please ensure that the name and title of that person is included in the renewal applications. Ensure that everything is added correctly. Formulas, don't change any formulas that are on there. Don't add any sections or budget categories. It's also important that you indicate whether your project is receiving or using rent along the fair market rent values or actual rent. So if you're a renewing provider, that will be indicated in the grant inventory worksheet. If you're using fair market rent, those updated FMR values are in the budget, so please use those. If not, you'll need to calculate actual rent based on the units assigned in the GIW. In terms of indirect and direct costs are attributable to specific costs, objects and categories, and they're variable or tend to be variable. Indirect costs can't be are non-attributable, usually including overhead administrative activities, and tend to be non-variable. So all applications must be submitted through Neighborly. We recommend getting in the system, getting familiar with it far before the deadline. It really helps when you name, when you have a standard naming convention, or easy to see what that document is. And please review the website and the NOFO for more reminders or more information on what needs to be included. So once it is submitted by July 15th at 5 p.m., which is a Wednesday. Sorry, I think I said it was a Friday earlier, but it is a Wednesday. This is what happens after that. So first, the Mayor's Office of Homeless Services screens the applications against the HUD and local threshold criteria. Then those projects are all submitted to our Resource Allocation Committee review panel, who will review and score those projects in according to the scoring criteria that's listed in the RFP. Decisions are made and publicly posted by August 7th. And then that whole package to HUD is due August 24th. The threshold requirements are completed application, demonstrated financial and management capacity, and experience to carry out the project as detailed in the application, demonstrated capacity to administer federal funds, the population and the activities meet eligibility requirements, requirement to participate in HMIS and coordinated entry, must meet match minimums and be cost reasonable, an acceptable audit from the past 2 years or for the past 2 years, and agrees to the HUD threshold requirements that are previously listed. And a reminder here about the approved process or the approved strategy for ranking projects that are once they're scored. So the first, we rank renewal projects first. HMIS and coordinated entry projects are ranked first, since they are kind of system critical projects and infrastructure. Third, renewal permanent housing programs up to 17.4 million will be ranked. And again, the priority is PSH, so there will be no rapid rehousing or joint transitional housing rapid rehousing programs accepted. And these, within those permanent housing projects, it's ranked in order of highest to lowest percentage score. Then we will rank new projects through reallocation. So this will be transitional housing and supportive services only projects. And then any new projects submitted through COC bonus and domestic violence bonus funding. And when we say reallocation, this is just the process that COCs use to shift funds in whole or in part from an existing eligible renewal project to create a new project. So we typically have to essentially recycle any funds that we're not allocating. That's the primary way, except for bonus funds, to make new projects. The projects will be ranked and put into two categories. So first is tier 1. And this is determined, again, by local rank of projects. This is considered relatively safe for renewal. Of course, never a guarantee, but typically is safer for renewal. But this, again, has now gone from 90% of annual renewal demand, so 90% of our portfolio was in tier 1, to 60%. So that's $17.4 million that will be in tier 1, aside from our HMIS and coordinated entry projects. The remainder of the projects will be in tier 2. So these are still scored and ranked and ordered in order of their score, but it is subject to more rigorous national competition. And part of what makes them competitive is our COC's whole application score. So that's where this comes in. And then bonus funds are also part of this national competition for funding. All right, I'm going to screen share Neighborly, and I saw a question come in about Neighborly as well. So I will try to answer that as we go along. All right, let me just make sure that, yeah, it's still logged in. So this is a quick screen share of our website where you can find all of our resources. So again, the RFP, the grant inventory worksheet, and the templates are posted here. So 2 for new applications and 1 for renewal. So you'll download that and fill it out. And the Neighborly application portal is the narrative questions aren't embedded into the Neighborly portal. They're just part of that application template that you're uploading. There are some questions you have to answer, and I'll go through those now, but you're not really going through the different template questions and including them here. You're not copying pasting them back into Neighborly. So this is a slightly different view than yours, but there's a landing page here. You're going to put in your contact information. If anything, if contacts change throughout the course of your application, I think you can change that automatically in Neighborly, but if not, again, you can just email us, and as administrators, we can change that. I'm going to provide some brief information about your program, your project name, describe whether it's new or renewal, tell us a little bit about the program, site address if it's like an actual site. Not all programs will have a site address. Ask a couple questions about your agency, and then there's some questions that are just for renewals. So again, if you're currently funded COC program, you're a renewal. Otherwise, the program is a new project. And this will just help us organize applications quickly and get an understanding of where applications lie as a whole. The required documents section is where you're going to upload not only the actual application templates, so those Word documents with the narrative or the Excel sheet, but also the supplementary documents. And then there's a conflict of interest form, a fair housing agreement, some additional COC specific agreements as well, for example, participating in HMIS. And then those questions that HUD is requiring as a threshold requirement for all projects. So really, it's brief project description, document uploads, 4 pages of signature, and that makes a full submission. You can submit it here. Okay. And I think that covers our slides. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to take a drink of water, and we can start with some of your questions.
All right, I will assist Althea. I'm going to start to take a couple of the questions from the chat. The first one that I am seeing is, I know it only came out today, but will we be revising the RFP in light of the HUD CPD guidance on chronicity and PSH? I think it's fair to say that you all should take a look for updates to this RFP as more guidance becomes released. Our intent is to release an FAQ, I believe, by the 19th. So any updates that we receive by that time, we'll put it in the FAQ, and we'll also send stuff out through 365, the same platforms you receive this. If there are changes to the RFP or additional guidance, we will continue to communicate that. Bill Wells, does that answer your question?
Yes, thanks, Ernestina.
Not a problem. I see Beth's question. When are we going to share what the program would be for the 1.5 million to assist the most vulnerable? Will it be something we can competitively apply for to protect existing residents who will become unhoused? I think the way that the Resource Allocation Committee structured this is there are the additional points that's helping them to identify who in your project is serving the most vulnerable. So when you look at the scoring guideline, it is still competitive, Beth, but it is also within the scoring rubric to help them be able to identify which programs contain the most seniors, which programs contains the most households that includes minor children, but it will be competitive. Does that answer your question, Ms. Beth?
No, I'm still confused. So is this $1.5 million going to be awarded by the RAC as part of Tier 1? Or is this something that you're setting aside and dealing with later?
Which 1.5 million are you referencing?
The 60 going down to 55%.
No, it is not competitive. Okay, thank you so much, Ms. Beth, for the clarification. Out of the 60% tier 1, 60% is tier 1, 55% is for PSH. The 1.5 is to support systems grants. So that is to support HMIS and coordinated access grants, and then the 55% is for PSH. Those will not be competitive. Thank you for that question.
That's what I first thought, and then there was something in Althea's slide that made me think it was something different. Thank you.
Not a problem. And we'll take a look back at the slide just to make sure it's clear in the slide. So thank you. What are your thoughts on making rapid rehousing a transitional housing project with community-based placement? I think that's really going to be something important for rapid rehousing programs to consider. Consider transitioning your rapid rehousing programs to transitional housing because they are ineligible for renewal in this project application. So that's a great question. Katie, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Perfect. Can a grantee apply for multiple project types under supported services only if their organization service model supports all areas? Tara Baxter, I'm going to ask you to come off mute and just give a little bit more information regarding your question.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So in the presentation, it was identified that supportive services only was in 3 areas: street outreach, coordinated entry, and standalone. And so I was just wondering, is it possible for a grantee to apply in all 3 areas if our service model supports that, or must we identify with one within that particular project type?
That's a great question. It should be answered both ways. So you are able to apply for one, or you are able to apply for all 3. Your project application just needs to make it clear as to what you are applying for. And for consistency basis, Althea, my thought is if you are applying for street outreach, that is one application. If you are applying for another project type, so it is separate applications. It should not be one application including all 3 areas.
Excellent. That was exactly what I needed to know. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you, Rebecca. July 15th is not a Friday. We will make the correction. completely blame me on that. I barely know it today, so thank you for that. Can we take people from category 2, not 1 and 4? Miss Mary, typically this has always been about category 1 and category 4. We did not put in here any form of category 2.
I asked because some of our people will be coming out of could be coming out of permanent housing within 2 weeks. And then makes them category 2. Some of their homelessness definition changes. So I just don't know how all that fits together.
In a way that HUD has formatted this, I think that's going to be a good conversation for agencies that's going to be transitioning people from PSH to transitional housing. Because the way that they're designing it is for that they are at risk because they are going to be leaving a PSH project. So I think when you are in a PSH project, that's going to be a different layer of the conversation. As you are submitting your project applications, category 1, category 4, but as you're looking to transition a project of clients that's in a PSH project to transitional housing, it's just going to be a different conversation, Miss Mary, for each of those organizations as we talk about those clients. Does that answer your question, ma'am?
Yeah, sort of. Yes, I mean the best any of us can. Yeah, I don't think they realize how many people they're making homeless. That's all. But that's why I say as best we can. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Is there a template of the application individuals can use in Word and then cut and paste into Neighborly? Or are the templates mentioned to be added as attachments in the system? Althea?
Okay, there we go. I thought I answered this question earlier, but I realized that it's actually potentially a different question than I thought. So the narrative generally, and most of the application questions are all going to be in that Word document, Excel document that you just go onto the upload, go and upload into the documents upload sheet. However, there is a way to generate a Word document or a preview of all of the information that's in Neighborly. I can only do that right now from a portal administrator perspective. So something we can include in our FAQ is some instructions on how applicants can go into Neighborly and generate a Word document or a PDF that shows all of the different sections in the Neighborly portal, just so you can do planning. So we'll make sure that's in the FAQ. Thank you.
For PSH projects interested in submitting both renewal and a backup transitional housing with a transition grant, would we submit 3 applications? Yes, that is accurate. You would submit 3 project applications. The next question is, can we submit a renewal in a transition grant for the same project? Yes, you can. Can we request less than the amount on the GIW for a new or transition grant? Yes, you can. Any questions, Ray and Andrea, about the responses for your questions?
No, thank you very much.
Thank you. Please clarify that 45% of the tier application will be something other than PSH. No, it will not, Elise. The tier 1 will be strictly for those 2 systems grants and PSH projects. Everything else will fall into a tier 2 category.
Gotcha.
Elise, does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
No problem. Renewals for rapid rehousing will not be accepted. Does this include DV bonus rapid rehousing renewals? Yes, it does include those 2 project types. Renewals will not be accepted. Hannah, any questions regarding that response?
No, that's clear. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there additional guidance available on new merit-based focus and how groups that serve underserved organizations should pivot to present their work? I think take a close look at that section of the NOFO and in the RFP. We try to help to list out some of the items that HUD is really focusing on for this project application. And also the scoring criteria helps you to be able to see how the resource allocation committee is just looking at those different priorities populations. But in regards to DV, in YHDP programs, keep in mind that let's say you have a PSH YHDP project, your program might not be in the top tier, but if it has a YHDP or DV restriction, reallocation still has to honor that restriction, even if it's not for that particular program. All right. For the person that asked the question, did I answer the question? It's under grants. I hope I answered the question. All right, the next one is can/should applicants do renewals and transition grants submit one PSH? Yes, you should. That is the recommendation. The recommendation would be to submit multiple grants because you really don't know how your project is going to score in this process. Can a joint project be turned into a transition project? A joint project can be turned, all right. So for Janae at Baltimore Safe Haven, a joint project is ineligible for renewal. However, it can submit a transition grant with the intent to transition to transitional housing. Or a joint project can just submit an application for a transitional housing project, which would be the recommendation, either or. Janae, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Perfect. All right, Althea, I think there's just a couple of more questions in here, and then we're going to take the rest of them to the FAQ. I'm going to let you pick them up at Beth's question.
That sounds good. And just sharing that, William, thank you for posting the additional guidance that HUD has put out. And then Beth, to your question, which is to be successful in transitional housing, coordinated access needs to prioritize people differently. Is there a plan to assist people with placement elsewhere? And I'll just say too that with these changes that start with our notice of funding opportunity, certainly the rest of our system is going to have to shift as well. So no specific details now, but we recognize that there may be changes needed to coordinated access in the future. So stay tuned as those conversations evolve. Can we apply for a renewal asking for less money if our beds stay the same?
Yes.
If it's actual, and I think it would just have to be actual rent.
Yes, because if the beds are staying the same and you're asking to reduce your dollar amount, the balance would just go in towards reallocation. So the answer would be yes to that because the units are not changing. All right.
And then if
Also,
you apply for, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Althea. I'm sorry.
Oh, good. If you're applying for a transition grant, we will likely have to ask for more money for this training. Is it acceptable? There, in the NOFO, there is no requirement that the dollar amount is the same from the renewal that the transition grant is related to. However, of course, just subject to the review of cost effectiveness, but understand that the line items will likely be different than your initial renewal project. Let's see, what does the national competition look like for the bonus funds? So the bonus funds as a whole are subject to national competition where our COC score is part of what makes these bonus funds competitive or not. I'll have to double check exactly how this bonus funds are then allocated, but they typically are the most competitive pots of funding. I don't know, Director, if you have anything else to add around that, but think about that as like the most competitive piece here. And I think they only award bonus funds if we do all of our ARD, but we'll include some more details of that in the FAQ.
And for context, I think last time we had an application in 2023, we had no request for bonus funding. And our community, based on our systems data, we're always in a middle tier. We're never at the top tier as it's related to performance. So I would just think in terms of how very limited those dollars are and how competitive bonus dollars are. Althea?
There's a question here around who to send specific questions to, so I'm putting our inbox in the chat. You can send questions to that email. Question around Neighborly, whether if you're submitting multiple applications, for example, a new, but then also a renewal or a transition for a current project, is it separate applications? Yes, it's a separate Neighborly submission for each application. And then I see a question from Devin around exit plan for clients who are currently enrolled in the program, and whether it's an immediate discharge or whether there's a transition period. I think this will depend, well, immediate discharge into homelessness is what we always want to avoid at all costs. So that's not the game plan. The transition period and the plan in general will partially depend what program it is, what other programs are funded. So this might be a little bit on a case-to-case basis, but like Beth's question, this is part of the system change that and planning that we'll have to do once we know what programs are operational and what new programs we have coming on board. But Director, please.
Yeah, and I really want to highlight that this is one of the NOFOs that's clearly the most competitive we've ever seen, and it looks very different from what we've ever seen. What we're going to be asking of you all is some patience. We want to understand how each of your organizations and projects scores, and then we're going to be having some individual meetings, but we don't want to see agencies start to just discharge clients. That's not going to be in the best interest. That's just not what we do as a community. So as we continue to move forward, each of your agencies has different periods of performance. We're going to be looking at every single option available for clients that are in permanent supportive housing that might not be funded. This is going to look really, really different. It can look like in prior competitions or in prior scenarios of an agency of us looking at units that's becoming available through other programs and transitioning clients into other projects, or some of our HABC units. We would look at prioritizing the programs that are not funded, prioritizing those clients for new projects that become available and other vacancies that becomes available through our ecosystem. So this is our CLC competition, but at the same time, we are projecting roughly 388 PSH households will be impacted. 134 rapid rehousing programs will be impacted. That is what we're looking at. So this is going to look like it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach. We're going to have to look at individual projects. But please, please, please just recognize that we're going to work on this together. But this isn't a scenario where we want to see people just immediately assume discharge your clients. Let's just continue to work through it and talk through it. Any questions from the entire community regarding that approach and those numbers that we're talking about with impact to our COC?
So, I mean, forgive me if I could jump in.
Go ahead.
So basically, when we're creating our PSH transition plan, if we're anticipating that it's going to go away, we need to do that in collaboration with you all. We need to talk about this before we say, like, because we've already begun to think about it, because we are anticipating it. But it sounds like there might be opportunities to link current PSH clients to new services.
So during the competition, the Resource Allocation Committee and MOHS can give absolutely no one-to-one TA about your project applications. My ask is, once the decisions are made and you are seeing where your agency is ranking, so let's say, Elise, your project is not selected and it's not a tier 1 program, what we don't want to see is people just see my project is not going to be funded. I'm just going to let all of my clients know today and let landlords know today that our project was not renewed, and as such, they're all going to get letters. I think at the end of the day, what we're asking for is, let's follow this process. Let's see where your agencies rank and score at, and then we can have conversations about how we can support. But I think what we're really trying to stop, because we've seen that a few years back of people receiving eviction notices, but we're just going to have to see this process before you all just, if you see that you're not in the top tier, let's have a conversation before you all just start to send client notifications. We just want to be a part of those conversations, just so you know what options might be available. And that's for the entire COC community. All right, go ahead, Althea.
And then Elise. Yes, I think, two questions here. So first, from Beth, when we last met, MOHS was working on a plan to increase COC overall scoring. How is that going? Do you have a sense of the range of points that you see the COC getting? I'm not sure that I have necessarily that to share yet, unless Director, you have anything you want to mention around this?
We have been looking at it, Ms. Beth. I think that our provider community hasn't quite caught up as much as we'd hoped to by this NOFO, because it takes into account what it takes into account is 10/1/2024 through 9/30/2025. So you all started to do a tremendous amount of work that has helped, but not to as large of a degree as we would have liked. We're going to continue to do some of that systems work. When I look at our preliminary score, right now, I'll send out some information, but to answer your question, Ms. Beth, we've gotten better in terms of performance from last year. But again, you don't know how other communities has also done in the same spaces. And some of what HUD is looking at is actually not its normal systems performance measures. And I'm going to share that with the group. If we have time, I'll share my screen and show a little bit more, but historically, it has been systems performance measures. They've changed those measures. So it's not so much related to what it historically has been.
Right, and then Elise, I see your question about asking whether whether tier 2s are guaranteed to be funded. No, tier 2 is not guaranteed to be funded. Again, we'll do everything we can to make our applications competitive as possible, but that's not guaranteed. And then Mary has a suggestion that a community-wide meeting with landlords could be helpful for those impacted. And as we get closer to understanding what programs will be operational, what will be coming online, we can certainly assess the best way to do that and whether there's a meeting that would be impactful or helpful. Any other questions, either in the chat, but also feel free to raise your hand or come off of mute and share.
Once the meeting has concluded and Althea stops recording, Ms. Beth and whoever wants to stay behind, I will share with you. I'm sharing my screen because this is not a part of the PowerPoint presentation, so I don't want to share it during the actual bidders conference. Any other questions for MOHS as it relates to the bidders conference? All right, Althea.
All right. Me. All right, just before we stop recording, thank you again for everyone's attendance. Just want to reiterate that we're here to support and answer questions. So again, that email I put in the chat, please email us with any questions, and we'll be updating our website. So please make sure you are